try to re-establish that connection. But meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa says the scourge of gender-based violence in the country is not for law enforcement to deal with alone, but it is a societal matter that requires the help of community members to report the perpetrators and end the silence. This comes as the body of a young woman was found dumped under a tree in Soweto in Dobsonville yesterday, the latest in a number of victims of gender-based violence since level 3 of the lockdown started on the 1st of June. Tshegofatso Pule, Naledi Phangindawo, Nompumelelo Tshaka, and now a 41-year-old woman from Eastern Cape in Tshwane has also been killed. In the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, women were also found murdered this week. In a statement, the president says South Africa has one of the highest levels of intimate partner violence in the world, with as much as 51% of women experiencing violence at the hands of their partners. The president has urged law enforcement to swiftly bring the perpetrators to book and has urged communities to work with police by reporting such crimes. Amnesty International South Africa has echoed the same sentiments, saying the perpetrators of gender-based violence and femicide must face justice. We speak now to Mienke Steytler. She is media officer at Amnesty International South Africa, and she joins me now live via Skype. Good afternoon to you, Mienke. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Palesa. Thank you for having me.
And I really think it's a sad situation here in the country. A few minutes ago, we were in conversation with our reporter in Eastern Cape in Tshwane. Yet another body of a woman has been discovered. And I know Amnesty International has previously spoken out about the vulnerability of women and girls, more so in this particular period of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, exactly. So women and girls are so vulnerable. And as you've said yourself, South Africa has one of the highest intimate partner violence figures in the world. And it feels like the last week or 10 days has just been absolutely horrific. It's so sad to hear of another woman being found in Eastern Cape. And yes, I mean, we do hear what the president says. We're also thankful to see that the Solidarity Fund is donating to shelters and centers and so forth to help women and girls and children, of course, because children are also affected by this. But we do want to say, we do want to say that the government has been talking about tackling this and setting up a National Command Council for gender-based violence and femicide for a while now. But we would really love to see the same urgency that was put behind the pandemic, put behind this issue as well. And yes, community members reporting incidents and so forth, that's fine, but we do worry that only 20% of reported cases in past years have ever made it to trial. And we want to know where's the breakdown. Is it that police officers need to be sensitized and trained better to deal with these reports? And what is the judicial process doing for people that are affected by gender-based violence and by murder, by femicide? And that there needs to be the same urgency that we've seen with dealing with the coronavirus.
But what do you think the problem might be? If you talk about only 20% of the reported cases that have actually made it on trial, is the problem here the justice system?
We think that that there is a problem in the justice system, and that there is also a problem in the investigation of these reported incidents. So is evidence collected correctly? We've actually heard reports of evidence not being correctly collected, and then the cases cannot actually progress through the judicial process, and people who may be the perpetrators of these sorts of crimes walk free. Of course, we're not saying that 100% of the reported cases would, have a guilty verdict, but even of the 20% that get to trial, under 9%, 8.6% actually have a guilty verdict, and that's very low. So we do believe that it comes down to the collection of evidence, the sensitization of the police officers that are doing the collecting of the evidence, and then getting that evidence to court and having the judicial process take its course.
So the reality is the issue of women dying at the hands of their partners in South Africa is not a new phenomenon, as you have said yourself. But the question really is, have we gone back to square one? Because we are again starting to see a surge in a number of reported gender-based violence, the killings, as I said on my introduction, this week only, I think we're talking about 5 women who have been killed. This one, the recent one in Highlands Park out of Easterest. So have we gone back to square one in terms of addressing and trying to get rid of gender-based violence and femicide in the country?
Yes, it was interesting. You say that we go back to square one. We possibly have, yes, and that's very sad. And that's why we're calling for urgency on this matter. It was interesting to compare us with some other countries that reported absolute, surges and calls to their shelters and to their emergency lines, and that we didn't quite see that surge according to your frontline workers, like your frontline organizations like Rape Crisis and also the government's own emergency line. However, obviously, the last week has shown us that this hasn't gone away. So something told us that maybe people weren't able to phone the lines because they were trapped with the people who, perpetrators of this abuse on them. So there is that worry, just because there's been a downslide in the number of cases reported, that doesn't actually mean it hasn't been happening behind closed doors. And it does feel like nothing's changed. Nothing's changed since last year's big protests around this. And it's really, really, really worrying. And with all respect to government officials who say that are obviously also affected by this and say that action needs to be taken and that are calling on communities, are we seeing timelines? Are we seeing concrete plans? Are we seeing, even this week on the 8th of June, the Department for Women, Youth and People with Disabilities put a statement out that said that they were moving ahead and forward on the National Command Council for GBVF. But I haven't been able to see a timeline. Is this going to happen next year? Are we going to be counting bodies over the next few weeks? And also, some arrests have been made this week, which is, of course, making us feel a little bit better. However, even when arrests are made, has the evidence been collected properly? Is the forensic evidence there? Are families being supported properly? And so that these perpetrators that have been arrested, or these suspected alleged perpetrators of these cases have been arrested, that they can be taken through the judicial process, and with that, that in some cases we will see guilty verdicts, and that there will be no tolerance at all for the abuse of women, girls, children, anybody.
So I was also looking at the numbers that in the first week of the lockdown, about 87,000 gender-based violence-related calls were received. This was just in the first week of the national lockdown. So it certainly has been a double blow for women. So you have COVID-19 to deal with here, and you have issues around gender-based violence at the same time.
That figure of 87,000 was quoted, I think, by Minister Bekitele.
Yes.
However, it was corrected. It was actually for, as far as I understand, for the last year. And the calls in the first week were more around 2,700 calls or so. So they did correct that. However, that doesn't mean that it's oh goodness, it wasn't 87,000. It's 2,700 people too many. And that's important. And yes, it is a double blow. So the World Health Organization, the UN, the United Nations has called it the shadow pandemic. It has been something that has come to the fore. I've spoken to people in other countries that work on the front line of domestic abuse, of gender-based violence, of femicide. And they've all said that they've seen it across the board, that one of the impacts of the coronavirus has been that many people are trapped with the perpetrators of the crimes, but maybe we can also surmise that the women who lost their lives in the last week were maybe safe from the perpetrators of those crimes during lockdown. And it's when we moved to level 3 that there was more movement allowed, that they were brought in contact again with the alleged perpetrators of their murders, and that they lost their lives. This is a very complicated issue, of course, but we cannot ignore the shadow pandemic while we're working on the pandemic. We need the same sort of urgency. We need the judicial process to work, and we need evidence to be collected properly.
All right, and I suppose the question that pops up quite often is, what else needs to be done to fight gender-based violence and femicide? Because one can say that almost everything has been done by women as the victims of this gender-based violence. But what needs to happen now going forward? You've mentioned the fact that plans may have been put in place, but there are no time frames, which I suppose will make it a bit difficult to be monitored.
Exactly. So we want accountability. We want to be able to monitor it. We want transparency of exactly what's happening, and we want progressiveness, looking to the future as well. And of course, that's the state, and the state has incredible obligations to keep women and girls safe, and children and everybody. But as we've seen in our country, women and girls really bear the brunt of this. And then there are, of course, education programs. There are organizations that have been working for years. I think of Sonke Gender Justice, that has been working with young men, working with young boys, but also young girls, to really bring in an understanding of that this is wrong. And also, I saw a stat recently that said that in South Africa, 1 in 3 men think that women do not have the same constitutional rights as men. And that needs to be changed as well. And of course, education and awareness raising programs is very important in that. But all of that's good and well. And as you've said, women have done a lot of this. We do need political will, and we do need transparency, accountability, and progressiveness, with timelines, with concrete plans that are doable, where stakeholders, where organizations that have worked on the front line are brought to the front line by government to really, really tackle this and end it on all levels: education, evidence collecting, the judicial process, and really making our society whole and healed again.
All right, Mienke, time constraints, but thank you so much for coming through. That's Mienke Steytler. She is media officer at Amnesty International South Africa, talking to us about the state of gender-based violence and femicide in the country. Meanwhile, the Solidarity Fund has approved 17 million